Hi, listener. This is from Ideology to Unity, a spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. So, this is episode 3 of my reading of Meister Eckhart, Selective Readings by Penguin Classics, and got published by them. Where we left off, we were talking about the oneness principle in Meister Eckhart's thought. So what this introduction brings us to now is creation. So without further ado, let's get going. In common with most other medieval systematic theologians, Meister Eckhart has an intense interest in the processes of creation itself, which for him is both ongoing and outside of time. This latter point, which Eckhart liked to emphasize, was typically daring, for it appeared to approximate to the condemned Aristotelian teaching that the world exists from eternity. Eckhart's meaning, however, was that the Christian must be considered eternal, as it cannot be said to have occurred. I actually said that wrong. The creation must be considered to be eternal, as it cannot be said to have occurred within time, since time itself did not exist in the created order. Also, for Eckhart, the creation is not an event located in the remote past, whose consequences we experience today, but is rather an ongoing and dynamic process. Also, like many other medieval theologians, Eckhart places great stress on the existence of creatures in the mind of God, as well as in their created state. And throughout his sermons, he urges his audience to attain knowledge of things as they exist eternally in the mind of God, and not as they exist temporarily here below. In particular, he stresses that we should become fully united with the image or idea of ourselves that exists from eternity in the mind of God. So, uniting with the eternal us, being presence that we are, and not with the temporary us or identities that we may claim or have or be given in this life, on this physical realm. And that's fundamentally in line with the law of one and mysticism and hermeticism and so forth. It seems very much compatible with what Eckhart Tolle talks about. And I really don't think his name being Eckhart Tolle is at all a coincidence. It may even be the reincarnation of Meister Eckhart, who knows? I'm allowing myself to slow down my reading here because I'm a little bit tired from or something, but it's fine. I don't need to rush. Similarly, Meister Eckhart shows a great concern with the typically medieval question of the nature of the relation between creatures and God. In technical terms, this is the field known as the theory of analogy. What is the relation between creatures and God? We are the creatures, of course, or at least that we are in the bodies of creatures. Humans, flesh suits. In technical terms, this is the field known as the theory of analogy. According to the most influential system of analogy, which is that associated with the name Thomas Aquinas, terms borrowed from the created order are not wholly without meaning when applied to God, but neither are they wholly accurate. Rather, they fall somewhere in between. Thus, the alignment between the world and God is neither one of identity nor one of complete difference, but is rather one of a real, though imperfect, relation. A further feature of this system is that although created qualities have their origin in God, they can truly be said to belong to creatures. Thus, Thomas is always concerned to preserve the real being of creatures, while affirming the transcendence of their creator. But Meister Eckhart approaches these questions with a subtly different emphasis. He is concerned generally to stress the extent to which the created world remains within God. And so for Eckhart, it can be said that being is only ever on loan to creatures. It never becomes authentically their own possession, as it does for Thomas. And this is a Buddhist concept as well, I think. That actually, I remember Sadhguru talking about this. I watched a video of him talking about it, and he was saying that everything that we have is kind of borrowed from the divine, and we ultimately give it back. He was actually, I think he's talking about the earth, actually, in this case, where we give it back. And in some cases in their awakening process or something, they get to a state where they keep on absorbing more and more and more divine love energy, and they keep it there to eat a lot as well to do it. But everything we consume and take has to be given back eventually. It's all temporary. And Meister Eckhart seemed to appreciate this. Thus, the individual quality of whiteness, justice, goodness, or whatever it may be, is identical with the universal principle of whiteness, justice, and goodness, and remains within God. According to Eckhart, the philosophical principle which prevents the being of all creatures from collapsing into a pantheistic identity with God is the fact that properties exist in a mixed state in individual beings while they are wholly united within God. I mean, that doesn't seem like that much of a difference, really, but okay. So this is expressed as the in quantum maxim, which means insofar as, thus a man or woman who is good is wholly identical with goodness itself, but only insofar as they are good. Insofar as we are just, we are justice itself. But Eckhart well knows that justice is only one among many elements which constitute the human person. So, to the extent that we are or are manifesting features of our being that comes from God, that depends on the extent to which we are present and embodying ourselves, and not the temporary things that are really contingent upon being. The general effect of Eckhart's thinking on the relation between God and his creation, therefore, is to stress the extent to which God can be said to be immanent within his creatures, since those properties which essentially combine to make things what they are still remain within God. Moreover, the use of the in quantum principle in order to distinguish between God and creatures can be seen in effect to be a subtle form of the oneness multiplicity paradigm that we have discussed above. Interestingly, it's a unison of opposites between oneness and multiplicity, which itself is a oneness. And that to me seems to represent there's the oneness that's serving others, there's the multiplicity of serving the self, and there's the multiplicity and the separation of serving the self. And ultimately the oneness of those opposites, which is a oneness beyond that duality. And yeah, So in God, all properties are one, while in the created order, they exist in combination. In other words, Eckhart knows that God is one, and so any or all his properties must exist in a state of unity, while all that is not God participates in multiplicity, which is duality. But duality is still a dance between opposites. Think of it as two opposites moving in a circle or spiral up together, and they are united ultimately anyway, but they're still divided in a dance. So the one exception to this rule is a single element located within the human person, which Eckhart sometimes calls the soul, a light, the ground of the soul, the spark of the soul, or more generally, simply intellect. Spark of the soul, fundamentally to me, it really reminds me of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, where he talks about consciousness as a flame or a spark, depending on the extent of consciousness. He even describes his own story, how in an experience he had where he was guided to the halls of Amenti, his spark became a flame and he became ageless. He became such that he didn't die, he didn't age. As for intellect, in the first stage of this reading, what we addressed was how, according to Eckhart Tolle, the intellect, in the sense that we could understand to be the mind or consciousness, is God and is also the soul. Each soul is that, and so there's this oneness and a divine quality to what we are, and everything is part of that ultimately. And that's a mentalism or hermeticism sort of principle. A light, a flame will have a light that shines forth, but it's a light, but hence the ego is like a darkness around it. And the more we clear up the darkness or what's blocking the light from coming out, shining forth, the more it shines forth, right? It's a light, it's a divine creative light, a light that shines out. Darkness limits, but light ultimately, but it's simply the absence of light. It's that which is not the light, which is that is. The light is that which is. The darkness is simply its absence. And that's what fear is, isn't it? Fear is the absence of love. Or something like that. Is it distortion or is it the absence? The absence. Well, I don't know, like maybe. So then there's the soul, of course. All of these things are one. And what's the ground? The ground of the soul, the ground. It's a sort of foundation. It's a sort of or fountain, or are temporary forms, and all temporary forms and the temporary things that we experience, these ultimately come from a ground from which flowers grow from. It's like there's ground, life grows from it, and that life are these temporary forms, but the ground itself is the divine from which it is all contingent and all comes from and all grows from. So in any case, it is this which, being unified and transcendent, sets us apart from other creatures and makes us a place of special interest to God. And it is this, a divine presence at the heart of our being, which is the foundation of our right action and the promise of our blessedness. And yeah, that sounds right to me. So next, we're going to be reading about the ground of the soul in more detail. This will be the end of this particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And yeah, it's a pleasure to read this. I've been looking forward to reading this, and I kind of put it off, but yeah, it's definitely worth it. So yeah, feel free to like or subscribe or not, your choice, and bye for now.